The blizzard struck Red Willow Pass like a living thing, howling down the ravines and erasing the trail Ethan Cole knew by heart. He had turned back early from checking the north fence, uneasy with the sky's sudden bruised dark color when his horse shied near a fallen pine. Through the curtain of snow, Ethan saw two shapes slumped against the trunk, almost indistinguishable from drift and shadow. He dismounted at once, boots sinking to the knee, heart hammering as he brushed snow from still shoulders. They were young women, Apache by their dress and braided hair, faces pale and lips cracked. Breath barely lifting their chests. One stirred faintly when he called out. The other did not. There was no time to wonder how they'd come to be there. Ethan shrugged off his coat and wrapped it around the nearer sister, then used his saddle blankets to cocoon them both. The wind tore at him as he lifted them, one at a time across his horse, securing them with practiced knots while snow stung his eyes raw. The ride back to his cabin felt endless. He leaned low, murmuring steady words he hoped they could hear, promising warmth, promising fire. Inside the cabin, he built the hearth high and fast. He rubbed life back into frozen hands, careful not to rush the cold from their skin, feeding them spoonfuls of broth when their lips could part. The sister who had stirred first, Ayana, he would learn, met his gaze with wary strength even through exhaustion. The other, Nita, coughed weakly and squeezed his sleeve as if anchoring herself to the world. Ethan worked through the night, guided by memory and instinct, listening to the storm batter the walls while he counted breaths and watched. Color return. By dawn, the wind softened and light filtered through frosted windows. Both sisters slept deeply, wrapped in quilts that had belonged to his mother. Ethan sat nearby, hands aching, mind racing with what-ifs he refused to voice. He had done what anyone should, he told himself, though he knew not everyone would have braved the pass. When Ayana finally woke, she whispered thanks in a voice like ember and ash. Nita smiled sleepily, eyes bright despite the bandages. Outside, the storm broke, leaving the land quiet and white. And inside, a small cabin held 3 lives changed by a single, unhesitating choice. The snow lingered for days, sealing the cabin into a quiet world of white and smoke. Recovery was slow but steady. Ethan rose before dawn to tend the fire, melt snow for water, and check the sisters' hands and feet, watching carefully for pain that meant warmth returning too fast. Ayana bore it with a healer's patience, asking for willow bark and herbs she recognized from his stores. She showed him how to grind them, how to wrap frost-nipped skin so it healed cleanly. Nita, restless even while weak, insisted on sitting up by the window, laughing softly at the way ravens argued over scraps in the yard. As strength returned, the cabin filled with shared work. Ethan mended tack and sharpened tools while Ayana sorted plants and stitched torn seams with precise fingers. Nita learned the rhythm of ranch chores quickly, feeding the chickens, sweeping snow from the steps, teasing Ethan for measuring coffee by habit instead of taste. Evenings brought stories. Ethan spoke of the land, of losing his parents young and choosing solitude, because it was simpler than grief. The sisters shared memories of their band, the winter hunt gone wrong, the sudden storm that separated them from the trail. Gratitude was there, heavy and sincere, but it settled into something gentler. Trust that grew with each day. They relied on one another. The storm finally broke enough for visitors. Apache riders appeared at the tree line one afternoon, cautious but relieved when they saw the sisters standing strong beside Ethan. Words were exchanged carefully, respect offered for shelter given. The riders urged the sisters to return at once, yet Ayana asked for a day. She wanted to be sure Nita could ride without harm. That night, the 3 sat close by the fire. Nita thanked Ethan plainly, saying he had not treated them as burdens or trophies, only as people who needed help. Ayana added that kindness shown without demand carried weight among her people. When morning came, the sisters saddled their horses. Snow squeaked under hooves, and breath steamed in the cold air. Before they rode out, Ayana pressed a small carved charm into Ethan's palm, a sign of safe passage. Nita hugged him hard, promising they would meet again once the passes cleared. Ethan watched them disappear into the bright distance. The cabin suddenly too quiet. He returned inside, banked the fire, and stood a long moment in the stillness. The snow would melt, the trails would open, and life would move forward. But the warmth they left behind lingered, changing the shape of his solitude. Spring arrived in fits and starts, loosening the snow's hold on red, willow pass and revealing the brown patience of the land beneath. Ethan threw himself into work, repairing fences bowed by drifts and readying the fields. Yet his thoughts wandered more often than he liked. He remembered Ayana's steady gaze and Nita's quick smile, the way the cabin had felt fuller without being crowded. When word reached him through a passing trader that the sisters' band would camp near the cottonwoods for the summer, Ethan felt the decision he'd been avoiding settle into place. He rode out at dawn with gifts chosen carefully, salt, coffee, and a set of tools he had forged himself. The camp welcomed him with measured warmth. Elders listened as he spoke plainly, not of rescue or debt, but of respect and gratitude. Ayana met him near the river, her posture calm and assured. Nita joined them, eyes bright, teasing him for taking so long. Over shared meals and long walks they spoke honestly. The sisters explained that among their people, bonds were built on consent and balance, and that they chose together. They admired Ethan's courage in the storm, but more than that, the way he had given help without claiming it. Ethan confessed his fears of being unworthy, of failing two people, when he had barely learned to share his life with one. Ayana answered with patience, saying partnership was work, not perfection. Nita laughed and said work suited a rancher well. As days passed, the idea of a shared future grew less daunting and more practical. A home with many hands, seasons faced together. Children taught both ways of living. Nothing was rushed. The elders asked questions. Ethan listened more than he spoke. When the time came to choose, it happened quietly, under clear skies, with the river whispering nearby. Ethan agreed, not as a claim but as a promise. The sisters accepted with equal gravity and joy. There was no grand ceremony at first, only exchanged gifts and shared vows spoken in both languages. Plans were made for the move after the harvest, for a larger cabin and a garden planted with familiar medicines. Ethan rode back to his ranch changed but not unmoored. The land was the same, yet it felt wider, as if it had been waiting for this choice. Summer would bring work and challenges as it always did. This time he would not face them alone. The first summer they spent together tested every promise they had made. Ayana and Nita arrived after the harvest with wagons of supplies and a small circle of kin to help them settle. The old cabin became a hive of activity, walls reinforced, a second room added, a proper hearth laid with stone. Ethan worked from sunup to dusk, grateful for the extra hands and the way decisions were shared now. Ayana organized the work with calm authority, mapping out gardens for corn, beans, and healing plants that would thrive in the soil. Nita took to the ranch like she'd been born to it, riding fence lines with Ethan and laughing when dust coated them both. Differences surfaced, as differences always do. There were mornings Ethan wanted quiet, and evenings the sisters wanted song. There were choices about trade, about when to help neighbors and when to protect their own. When tempers flared, Ayana insisted they sit and speak until the heat cooled. Nita refused silence, pulling truth into the open with humor that softened sharp edges. Ethan learned to listen without retreating, to say what he needed without shutting down. The work went on regardless, storms to outrun, calves to save, a well to deepen, but the home grew steadier with each challenge met together. The surrounding valley watched closely. Some neighbors came curious, others cautious. Ethan answered questions plainly and let actions do the rest. When a late frost threatened nearby homesteads, Ayana organized a shared effort, distributing seed and teaching ways to protect young shoots. Nita led riders to drive lost cattle home during a sudden squall. Respect followed usefulness, and usefulness became trust. By autumn, the garden overflowed. The sisters' kin returned for a small gathering that marked the season and the household's bond. There were no speeches, just shared food, exchanged gifts, and laughter that carried into the crisp night. Ethan stood back for a moment, watching firelight catch on familiar faces, realizing how different his life felt without feeling unfamiliar. The ranch had become a place of meeting rather than isolation. Winter came again, gentler than the last. When the first snow fell, they stood together on the porch, steam rising from their breath. Oyana placed her hand over Ethan's, steady and sure. Nita leaned in, pointing out tracks already forming along the tree line. The storm that had once nearly ended 2 lives had led them here, to a home, built deliberately, to love chosen and maintained. Inside, the hearth waited, and with it, the knowledge that whatever the season brought, they would face it together.